Let us look at some of the broad lessons that you can learn from the interviews that we had. Let me start with the first interview with the Controller General of India's Patents, Designs and Trademarks Office. He is the senior most person who runs the show in India on intellectual property rights. Mr. Gupta said that India is well known for the quality of its patents these days, as well as the quality of the designs that it gets approved, and the manner in which it has made efforts to preserve and conserve its rich cultural and natural heritage at a global level. These days, with the growing emphasis on startups in India as well as other countries of the world, intellectual property rights have become the rage. Mr. Gupta mentioned in the course of his interview with me that the filings in Indian IP offices have increased multifold in a span of the last 10 years. He mentioned that the focus areas of IP policies have now also turned to issues of awareness, commercialization and enforcement. So that is a big change. Earlier, IP offices were supposed to be just offices which collected applications, took a decision on them, and that was the end of it. Today, they have a promotional or a development function as well. Now, let me come to what Mr. Aloknath De, the corporate vice president and the CTO of Samsung Research Institute, had to say about the issue of IPRs. He said Samsung has got an open ideation program where anyone working in a certain area but with a brilliant idea could work on another product and get it launched and capture the idea. Now, Mr. De was referring to commercialization through an ideation process. According to Mr. De, IPR policy in a project is so significant that it must never be missed. Mostly, Samsung has relied on two important perspectives: the technical complexity and the business impact of the intellectual property that is created within their organization. Statistics suggest that Samsung also has globally about 25% of the patents in 5G, and it is ranked number 2 in the global patenting scene. Now, let me turn to what Tata Consultancy Service, which is the global brand from India in software development and programming. TCS is very IP savvy, and it follows a very systematic process to receive protection on intellectual property. In fact, as Mr. Mohanty mentioned, they have made it a part of their corporate strategy. TCS looks at the resources at hand, develops a very interesting IP portfolio, and based on its features, proceeds to get protection on it, both in India as well as in the international scene. Their IP strategy, as Mr. Mohanty mentioned, has 3 fundamental principles: promotion, protection and profit. And you would also notice that TCS has been granted a patent in the US on how an enterprise has to manage its patent portfolio, which is a very interesting idea, which got a patent. Now, let me come to what the startup Streamingo Solutions does in the realm of IP, which could be of great significance to all of you. As the proprietor mentioned, it works on artificial intelligence, machine learning, image processing and speech recognition. Streamingo has developed several intellectual property rights, copyrights, patents, and they have trademarks, and they have many more to follow in a pipeline. But what they did discuss was on one specific point, that as a startup organization with intellectual property rights, their requirements are special. They need a lot more information and they need a lot of support by way of information on IP, its progress, and how it has caught up with the world, what about state of art, and so on and so forth. So this is the particular character of a startup which gets into the IP space. Having said about startups, let me finally move to the issue of cultural resources. Here I come to the interview that we had with Ms. Sanjana Kapoor. Sanjana heads the Junoon Theatre, which is based in Delhi. It's a very interesting theatre. It's not a theatre in a location specific sense. It is a theatre which reaches out to rural communities and tries to kindle their art forms, develop their art forms, give them a platform. So it's a reach out kind of a model, not just a stay put kind of a model. Now Sanjana's central point was, yes, we respect the creative ideas which have translated to intellectual property rights through copyrights or maybe cultural other creative expressions. But at the same time, it is also the obligation of an IPR holder to ensure that all the IPs that he has created reaches to the communities who would like to utilize them to develop cultural resources. So this is, you are getting a totally different perspective when it comes to cultural resources. There is a greater emphasis when it comes to cultural resources to develop the collective abilities of people and the public good content of the cultural resources, not just keeping it as a proprietary resource. Finally, I come to the issue of Darjeeling tea, so well discussed by Mr. Sanjay Bansal. Sanjay Bansal's Ambutia tea estate is internationally known. It is in the, on the Darjeeling tea hillock, a beautiful view when you stand there. You can see a complete landscape of how the temperate, quasi-temperate forests of Darjeeling look like. He said something very interesting. He said that without GI protection, the Darjeeling farmer would have been worse off. And it is not just about Darjeeling tea being there in the packet. It is also about having the entire packet containing only Darjeeling tea and not blended with other teas and still labeled as Darjeeling tea. When I used to work among the Darjeeling tea estate owners and the Darjeeling tea growers, I used to come across a very interesting story. And that story went like this. Darjeeling produces 10 million kilograms of tea. And in the 1990s, a worldwide survey indicated that nearly 40 million kilograms used to be sold as Darjeeling tea. Now you can imagine the kind of revenue loss that a grower of Darjeeling tea suffered in those days. Thanks to Darjeeling tea being registered as a certified trademark and later on as a geographical indication, the Darjeeling tea growers are assured that their right to their crop and their product is firmly protected. So these are the major lessons that one can draw from the interviews that I had. Of course, you would have also seen that I had discussed commercialization of IP in the earlier weeks. I also discussed about licensing, I discussed about assignment, and then self-use of IP and sale of IP. What do we glean from the discussions and the interviews that we had with Samsung and TCS? That IP is not enough to be kept in a storeroom. It has to be commercialized through measures that the company feels is the right measure to turn it into a monetary asset. Now, this works very well with companies, but what about community organizations like Darjeeling tea growers or cultural associations? They would like to see that intellectual property rights are treated as collective resources. They have to be appreciated as collective resources, not as individual proprietary resources or a group of individuals' proprietary resource, which has to be exploited for profits. Therefore, all these factors bring out various dimensions of intellectual property rights and the central importance of governments to see that intellectual property policies are framed in a manner that reconciles social benefits with the idea of returns to the IP creator. Now, that's a very delicate balance. It cannot be created by the market alone. You need enlightened policies for that. With this, we come to the end of this course. I hope that I have managed to give you what I promised, a primer on legal, economic, and managerial dimensions of intellectual property rights. I keenly await your response. Thank you.